Travis, George, Steve, and Bob were inseparable. They lived for the next adrenaline rush. Whether it was skydiving, bungee jumping, or exploring haunted caves, they craved adventure. This weekend was no different. They planned a barbecue, ready to share stories and plan their next big thrill. The grill sizzled, the burgers were juicy, and the air crackled with anticipation.
I'm up for anything,
George announced, wiping barbecue sauce from his chin.
Me too,
Added Bob, his voice full of bravado, though he secretly hoped their next adventure wouldn't be too terrifying. Travis leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eye.
You guys ever hear about Momo, the Missouri monster?
Momo, that's just a campfire story to scare kids.
Undeterred, Travis continued, describing a 7-foot-tall creature with a bulbous head, glowing red eyes, and a stench that could knock you out. There are tales of missing hikers and eerie sightings in the woods near Louisiana, Missouri. An idea began to form in Steve's mind.
We should go find this Momo,
He declared, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Bob paled. He knew his friends were serious, and that meant he was outnumbered. The next day, they found themselves in Louisiana, Missouri, checking into a rundown motel. The place looked like it hadn't seen a renovation in decades, with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed ominously. The air hung heavy with humidity and a strange, unsettling stillness. It was the kind of atmosphere that made you feel like you were being watched, even when you were alone. Gibson, the motel owner, eyed them with suspicion. His eyes were sharp, like he could see right through their intentions.
"You boys here for the Momo hunt?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight of experience and warning.
They exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. The question hung in the air, thick with tension.
How'd you know? One of them, Travis, finally asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and fear.
Travis asked, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and apprehension.
"Let's just say you're not the first." Gibson's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a sense of foreboding. "Group of youngsters came by last year, never came back." His words sent a chill down their spines, the gravity of the situation sinking in.
He leaned closer, his voice a low growl as if sharing a dark secret.
"Keep your windows shut at night, you hear?" His eyes bore into theirs, making sure they understood the seriousness of his warning.
His warning did little to dampen their spirits. They laughed it off, thinking it was just another local trying to scare them. If anything, it only fueled their determination to find Momo. They were young, fearless, and ready for an adventure, unaware of the true danger that lay ahead. Armed with flashlights, a video camera, courtesy of Steve, and a healthy dose of fear, they set off into the woods. The night was still, the air thick with anticipation. Each step they took seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the forest itself was amplifying their presence. The trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to press in on them, their branches clawing at the fading light. It was as if the forest was alive, breathing, watching their every move. The dense canopy above blocked out the moonlight, casting eerie shadows that danced with every flicker of their flashlights. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down their spines. The sounds of the forest were amplified in the darkness, each noise a potential threat. They could hear the distant hoot of an owl, the scurrying of small animals, and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. They felt like they were being watched, but by what? The feeling of unseen eyes following their every move was unnerving. The deeper they went, the stronger the sensation grew, as if the forest itself was aware of their intrusion.
You guys feeling that? The question hung in the air, heavy with tension.
Bob whispered, his voice trembling. His eyes darted around, searching the darkness for any sign of movement.
Relax, Bob. The words were meant to be comforting, but they fell flat in the oppressive silence of the forest.
Steve said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. He tried to muster a reassuring smile, but it came out as a grimace. As dusk settled, they stumbled upon a clearing. The sudden openness was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. The trees seemed to form a natural barrier around the clearing, as if guarding whatever lay within. In the fading light, they could just make out the outline of an old abandoned house. It stood there, silent and foreboding, a relic of a time long past. Its windows were boarded up, and the porch sagged precariously. The house seemed to lean towards them, as if inviting them in, or perhaps warning them to stay away. The air around it was thick with an unspoken history, a sense of stories left untold.
Let's check it out.
Steve said, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. They approached cautiously, the floorboards groaning under their weight. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay.
Travis, Bob, you two take the upstairs. George and I will check down here.
Travis and Bob exchanged nervous glances before making their way up the creaking staircase. Meanwhile, George and Steve slowly made their way through the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found nothing but cobwebs, broken furniture, and an eerie silence that seemed to hum. Upstairs, Travis and Bob were about to turn back when they heard a blood-curdling scream. It was George. They rushed back down the stairs, their hearts pounding in their chests. But they were too late. George stood in the corner, shaking with fright, his eyes wide with terror. Standing over him was a hulking figure covered in matted hair. Its eyes glowed an eerie red in the darkness. Momo. Before they could react, the creature lunged, its putrid breath hot on their faces. Bob screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard.
Steve grabbed Bob's arm and pulled him to his feet. "Run!" he yelled.
They sprinted out of the house, the creature's guttural roars echoing behind them. The woods were dark, the path treacherous, but they didn't dare slow down. Momo was faster. They could hear its heavy footsteps pounding the ground, gaining on them with each stride. Suddenly, George screamed again. They turned to see Momo's massive hand close around George's throat, lifting him off the ground.
Without hesitation, Steve grabbed a fallen branch and charged at the creature, swinging it with all his might. The forest was eerily silent, save for the sound of Steve's heavy breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew he had to act. The branch felt rough in his hands, but it was the only weapon he had. The branch connected with Momo's head with a sickening thud. The impact reverberated through Steve's arms, but he didn't let go. He swung again, determined to protect his friend.
The creature roared in pain, releasing George. George hit the ground, gasping for air. His vision blurred, but he could see Steve standing his ground. The night was filled with the sounds of their struggle, a desperate fight for survival. But their victory was short-lived. Momo turned its fiery gaze on Steve, its rage palpable. The creature's eyes burned with an intensity that made Steve's blood run cold. He could feel the heat of its stare, a promise of pain and retribution. Before George could warn him, the creature grabbed Steve, its claws digging into his flesh. Steve cried out in pain, the sharp claws tearing through his shirt and into his skin. He struggled, but the creature's grip was like iron. Thinking fast, George grabbed his canteen and hurled its contents at Momo. The water arced through the air, glinting in the moonlight before splashing onto the creature. The water splashed against the creature's face, and it howled in pain, releasing Steve. The sound was deafening, a mix of rage and agony that echoed through the forest. The water seemed to have a strange effect on it. Momo staggered back, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. It was as if the water had sapped its strength, leaving it vulnerable.
"Don't just stand there, run!" George yelled, scrambling to his feet. His voice was hoarse, but the urgency was clear. They had to get away while they still could.
They didn't need to be told twice. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them. The image of Momo's glowing eyes burned into their minds. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches snagging at their clothes and roots threatening to trip them. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. The memory of the creature's roar and the feel of its claws drove them forward, a relentless push to escape the nightmare that had come to life in the dark woods. The following morning, a search party combed the woods, their faces grim. They had heard the terrified calls reporting a monster and knew they were searching for more than just lost hikers. They found George's mangled body first, his eyes still wide with terror. Then they found Steve, battered and bruised, but alive. He was babbling incoherently about a monster, about glowing eyes, about the smell of death. They rushed him to the hospital, but he was never the same. The trauma had taken its toll, leaving him a shell of his former self. As the search party ventured deeper into the woods, they stumbled upon something that chilled them to the bone. Torn clothes, bloodstains on the leaves, and then they saw them, a pair of glowing red eyes watching them from the darkness. The creature was real. Panicked, they scrambled back to their minibus, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they sped away, they could hear the creature's deafening roar, a chilling reminder that some legends are best left undisturbed. They had gone looking for Momo, and they had found him. But at what cost? A few days later, Steve's video camera was found in the woods. It had miraculously survived in one piece. The men who found it put the memory card into a computer and watched the footage. What they saw was horrifying. The video showed the woods at night, shrouded in darkness, with only the faint light of the camera illuminating the path ahead. Heavy breathing could be heard, echoing through the silence. The tension was palpable. Suddenly, the red eyes appeared on the screen, glowing menacingly in the darkness. The creature was real, and it was watching. Without warning, the monster lunged at the camera, its terrifying form filling the screen. Steve's terrified screams pierced the night as the camera fell to the ground, capturing the chaos and fear in its final moments. The footage ended abruptly, leaving the viewers in a state of shock. The legend of Momo was no longer just a story. It was a living nightmare that had claimed more victims. A few days later, the car was found with its window smashed and a trail of blood leading into the woods. The air was thick with an uneasy silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and distant calls of unseen creatures. As the men investigating the scene followed the blood trail, their flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. Their hearts pounded in their chests, each step deeper into the woods, amplifying the sense of dread. Suddenly, one of the men froze, his light catching something in the tree line. Red eyes glowed menacingly from the darkness, watching their every move. The men exchanged terrified glances, the reality of the legend sinking in. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. The red eyes moved closer and the men turned to run, but it was too late. Their final moments, screams of terror, the sound of branches breaking and the crimson eyes drawing nearer. What followed was only the chilling echo of their cries. The men were never seen again. The legend of Momo had claimed more lives, and the haunting presence of the creature continued to loom over the town. The forest became a forbidden place, a reminder of the horrors that lurked within. The search for answers only deepened the mystery, turning the once thrilling adventure into a tale of terror that would haunt the town forever.